No, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for coming out. And yeah, we're going to deal with, I think, a very important topic, one I think that's close to all of your hearts, to say the least. Rocklink Investment Partners, that's a discretionary money manager. We're registered across the country, so we have clients in all the provinces. And we run private portfolios for, I would say, medium to higher net worth clients. We do have, though, clients that don't fall into that category, and if someone comes to us and they work for any charities, then we have no minimums, and we'll work with people that are working in charitable organizations and so forth. We're, again, just focusing on protecting people's capital and building their wealth in the crazy environment in the world that we live in. And so that's why, of course, I have an opinion on a lot of things that are going on in Canada, you're going to hear about that. Let's jump right into this and talk a little bit about Canada's role in the coming resource boom. So imagine a world where artificial intelligence reshapes many of our decisions, robots revolutionize industries, and electric vehicles dominate our highways. And as you know, this actually isn't science fiction anymore. It's really a fast approaching reality. And this reality is ravenous for power, for energy. And an enormous surge in global energy demand is looming, one poised to last for many decades if these trends continue. Fueled by breakthroughs, as you know, in artificial intelligence, digitization, cryptocurrencies, robotics, EVs. And we're really on the brink of an energy revolution that will ignite a massive resource boom. This escalating hunger for power will test our resolve, especially in Canada, to produce and mine the resources necessary to meet this massive increase in demand and build the required large-scale infrastructure projects. And so I want to take a few moments and unpack some of this for you today at this lunch and look at this massive shift that's taking place and, what's Canada's response and how are we responding to this and what should we be doing in the face of this tremendous opportunity? How does Canada fit into this resource renaissance, really? And so, as you know, there's a number of drivers to this energy demand, this increase in energy demand. I'm just going to break it into three areas. First is AI, artificial intelligence, and data centers. AI is growing exponentially, as you know, and this includes tools like chatbots and image generators that people use every day, and these require massive amounts of computational power. And so the role of data centers, and I'm just going to skim the surface and really not get into a lot of details, just to give you a sense of the expansive nature of what's taking place here. Data centers are the main infrastructure supporting AI and digitization, and they handle, of course, all the heavy lifting, if you will, for the energy. And by 2030, 5 years from now, data center electricity consumption could double from just 2024. Okay, it's just last year up until a 6-year period. And that the amount of power that we're going to need just for data centers by the year 2030, again, 5 years from now, 4 or 5 years from now, will be equivalent to 90 million US average households full power use for a year. It's a large amount of energy that's coming at us like a real wave. Currently, the data centers use up about 4% of US electricity. And by, again, 2030, this could be over 9%. So you're, again, seeing why people are getting a little hyperactive in terms of the electrical grids and some of the power issues that we're facing. Long term, the global looking out to sort of 2050, if we look at 2035, data centers are projected to use 4.5% of total global power. This is all the power in the world by 2035, about 4.5%. And by 2050, it could be just a little less than 10% of the total global energy needs. Interesting enough, the US has about 45% of the data centers in the world. There's about 12,000 data centers. They have about 5,400, 5,500. And that 12,000 is expected to grow to about 90,000 data centers by 2050. I mean, that's just a massive, massive increase in data centers. In the US, my guess and expectations are that they'll have well over 50%, if not 60% of those. And that makes sense because the US is attracting capital. And wherever you attract capital and you are committed to building them, money's going to go there. And that's what we're seeing south of the border. By 2050, data centers will require the current electricity use of a country like Japan, which is the 5th largest economy in the world. And so you get this massive sort of increase, if you will, in energy demand. That's one area, AI and data centers. Second, digitization and robotics. Digitization across industries, as you know, cloud computing for streaming services, the Internet of Things for sensors in smart homes and appliances, the smart manufacturing for cheaper consumer products will dramatically increase our energy needs. We see all these, appliances all hooked up to the internet. Well, that's demanding a lot of energy. The number of connected internet devices is projected to hit 30 billion by 2030. That's 5 years. And with robotics used in automation, logistics, and healthcare, such as surgical assistance, along with industrial electrification, will only drive up this energy demand even more. The total number of robots worldwide could grow from about 50 million in 2025, now about 50 million, up to into the billions. I mean, if you listen to Elon Musk, and I'm not suggesting his projections are going to be accurate, but he thinks everyone's going to have a humanoid robot in their house, maybe a couple. But at any rate, what the point is that we're going to go from like zero humanoids up to a very large number that would be into the millions, if not up to up to a billion. Connected devices alone could drive up to 2,300 terawatts of global electricity use by 2040, and that's equivalent to over 200 million households. All the energy of 200 million households is practically the United States. So these are again large numbers. Even if these projections are off by a little bit, it's still, you can see the direction. It's a really big tidal wave. The third area that's driving energy use would be electric vehicles and other technologies like cryptocurrencies. So EVs, again, as you know, are a major driver, with global sales expected to reach up to 65% of new cars by 2050, again, depending on these EV mandates, and over 1 billion vehicles at that time hooked up to your grid. An average EV needs about 2,500 to 4,000 kilowatts of power each year, and that's similar to a household running all the major appliances nonstop. So you see the kind of demand that's going to be put on the systems for energy. The International Energy Agency notes that AI and EVs are a key factor in surging electricity over the next 2 decades. Total electricity demand, just looking at electricity in terms of the global picture, we need about 31,900 terawatts currently. And so you say, okay, just remember that number, 31,900. If we continue to progress, low expectations mean that we'll need about 58,000, almost double our electricity use by 2050. If we get aggressive and we go net zero, we get really crazy in our climate drive, we might have to have 2.5 times the electricity that we have now in the next 25 years. And as you know, that's easier said than done. That's going to be very difficult. And so these are some of the things that are driving the energy demands in the world, and they're really quite revolutionary. And as we'll look at in a few moments, this is going to be a boom for the resource sector. That all of this requires massive amount of mining and extraction industries. You can't do it just by sitting in an office. The projected total energy needs of the world, if you just look at the current situation, look at the total energy in the world, right now we have about 80% comes from fossil fuels, the production, renewables, which is largely hydro. You've got solar and wind, but hydro is the big one, hydroelectricity. Is about 15-20%, nuclear is around 5%, and then hydrogen's a small amount. Even when you go up to 2050 and you're fairly conservative on your numbers, the energy demand overall is going to grow quite substantially, about 20 to 25% worldwide, which is a big number. But the key shift there will be electricity. But if you look underneath the hood, we're still going to be 67, 2/3 reliant. It's down from maybe 80% on fossil fuels and coal. And even if you look at those who are really on the green side of things in terms of their ideology, we're still going to need probably 80 million barrels of oil a day. Now we're just a little over 100 million barrels. But most even conservative estimates say that that's not going to, that 100 million a day is not even going to go down at all over the next 25 years. We're going to need a lot of fossil fuels. And if you look at some projections, they say it's actually probably be up. Could be as high as 120 million barrels a day. And so, yeah, we have to get realistic about what's happening in terms of the world and the opportunities that are out there. And if Canada doesn't get behind some of these things, of course, we're just going to be left behind. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Now that's the energy demand. Now what does that mean for some of the metals and minerals? And so then again, I'm just going to give you a quick smattering of some of the growth trajectory for some of these metals and minerals. If you think about these key metals and minerals, overall projection, it means that some of them are going to be growing anywhere from 100 to 400 or 500% in growth over the next 25 years we're going to need. If you think of copper, copper is a very important metal. And right now we have a tight copper market. It's not like we have excess copper. And copper, you just don't find it everywhere. It's large deposits in very few locations. Some of those locations aren't great locations politically. They take up to 10 years to develop these mines, and they take tens of billions of dollars of committed capital. So it's hard to get this growth. Copper alone, we're going to see probably conservatively 3 to 4% compounded growth in the demand for copper. Well, over 20 years, that's over 80% growth. Another 25 years, you've got to double your copper. And where's that going to come from? How are we going to do that? And so this is going to put a premium again on something like copper as a very important asset. If you think also of nuclear power is very important to this country. And from Saskatchewan, you appreciate that. I mean, Saskatchewan is an amazing place in terms of uranium. But uranium is poised for substantial growth from today up until 2050, next 25 years. Again, because of this global push to triple nuclear capacity. That's what 30 different countries have agreed to. This is right out in the open. They're going to use more nuclear. You've got companies like Microsoft, Google, Amazon doing deals to secure nuclear power for their AI, for their artificial intelligence data centers. And so right now we consume about 65,000 to 70,000 metric tons of uranium a year, and that's expected to grow over 200,000 metric tons, so a tripling of uranium in the next 25 years. And now that is fantastic news for Saskatchewan if you can actually dig the hole, right? If you can develop the project. Other key metals, and I'm just going to rattle off the percentage growth because of time. Cobalt, 100% growth in the next 25 years we'll need. Copper, as I said, 80 to 100. Graphite, 250% to 300%. Lithium, 600% plus. Nickel, 100%. Rare earths, a whole bunch of rare earths. They're not rare, but we still have to go look for them. China has dominated this market, which is a very risky thing, and it's good to see President Trump pushing back and developing. He just did a deal, bought an equity stake in Trilogy Energy so that they can secure their rare earths up in Alaska and different places. This is smart. You don't want to be vulnerable to your enemies. But the reality is that we need, in many cases, a rare earth 200, 300, 400% increases in some of these rare earths. And we can do it, but we have to dig the holes, and we have to commit the capital, and we have to mine them. And we can do all of this, and uranium, as I said, up 200%. So the conclusion, in essence, is these advancements in AI, digitization, electric vehicles, robotics, other technologies such as cryptocurrencies will fuel an extraordinary surge in energy needs, necessitating a diverse blend of oil and gas, LNG, renewable sources, nuclear power, hydrogen, and an urgent need to rehaul all of our electrical grids and to rebuild them, which will take trillions of dollars. I'm speaking globally and around North America, it'll be in the trillions of dollars. And it's going to have a massive increase in things like lithium, nickel, silver, copper, etc., all of these things. That's great news for a country like Canada, which is resource rich. So where is Canada? Where is Canada? Let's just take a look at this country and what's happening. Canada is a nation of staggering natural abundance, blessed with immense resource wealth. This divine endowment testifies to its providential favor, with God's provision evident across the landscape. Beyond its third largest oil reserves in the world, 20% of global fresh water, the fourth largest hydropower capacity in the world, and vast timberlands, one must consider the sheer scale and strategic importance of these blessings, and so many more. The Canadian Shield, that magnificent geological creation covering nearly half the country, is a veritable vault of mineral wealth. It's one of the world's richest sources of nickel, cobalt, copper, zinc, and diamonds, the very building blocks of modern industry and technology. The province of Saskatchewan alone possesses over half of the world's high-grade uranium reserves, a critical resource for both energy and national security in an uncertain world. The longest coastline provides sustainable seafood for exports matched by prairie agriculture as global breadbasket yielding wheat, canola, and other pulses for food stability. With the second largest landmass, Canada has abundance for room for growth and its pristine wilderness at the same time, a rare inheritance for prosperity and strength, awaiting wise stewardship. Now let's look at what's happened the last 10 years. I know some of you are very much aware of this, you've lived it, but so I won't take too much time on it. But over the past decade, under the Liberal government led by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and now Prime Minister Mark Carney, a series of environmental, climate, and investment policies have reshaped the landscape for Canada's resource industries, including the oil, gas, mining, and related sectors. While these measures are often promoted as steps towards sustainability, reconciliation with Indigenous people, and national security, critics from industry and other think tanks like the Fraser Institute or Macdonald-Laurier Institute argue that they have created insurmountable barriers. These include increased regulatory compliance, prolonged approval timelines, heightened uncertainty, and escalating costs, ultimately deterring capital investment and stifling economic growth. Now let's examine, again, just some of the major laws that were passed and some of the regulations between 2015 and 2025, along with their impact. I'm going to do their impact on GDP and on job losses that we have not had as a result of these policies. We haven't created jobs. We'll also review forward-looking estimates and the consequences for the labor market and job creation over the same periods. So let's just, again, look at 6 key pieces of legislation which have really throttled the resource sector in this country. And it's really, Canada's resource sector and what's happened here, these policies have really transformed our sector from a global investment magnet into a cautionary tale of regulatory overreach. So let's look at these quickly. First, the Impact Assessment Act and Canadian Energy Regulator Act, part of Bill C-69 in 2019 and amended in 2024. This overhauled federal environmental assessments, replacing older frameworks with broader criteria encompassing climate change, social health, and economic impacts. It mandated extensive Indigenous consultations and granted ministerial discretion in approvals. The result of that legislation? The result was a project review timelines ballooned, introducing politicization and veto powers. Capital spending in energy and mining plummeted, and projects were canceled as a result of that first legislation I mentioned, Bill C-69, which many of you are very much aware of. Second, the Oil Tanker Moratorium Bill, C-48 in 2019. This banned tankers carrying over 12,500 metric tons of crude and persistence oil along British Columbia's north coast. This restricted export routes for Canadian oil to lucrative Asian markets, undermining projects and eroding market access, despite allowing foreign tankers in. We don't do it ourselves. And there's a whole bunch of lines you could go further in each one of these regulatory situations. Third, the Arctic offshore oil and gas moratorium, announced in 2016 and extended in 2023 to at least 2028. This imposed an indefinite ban on new exploration licenses in the Arctic waters. This froze development in resource-rich areas, halting potential investments due to abrupt policy shifts. Fourth, the Clean Fuel Regulations Act, passed in 2022. This requires fuel producers to cut carbon intensity by 15% by 2030 through credits, biofuels, or other tech investments. Again, what does this do? It adds compliance costs, raises operational costs, pushes money out of the country. Fifth, the 2023 methane emissions regulations. This demanded 40 to 45% reduction by 2025 and 75% by 2030 via controls on venting and flaring. Again, what does this do? Cost upgrades, curtails production, money moves out. Sixth, the last one I'll mention, drafted in 2024, the oil and gas greenhouse gas emissions cap. This aims at a 35 to 38% reductions below 2019 levels by 2030. What does this do again? Just stymies the industry, cuts back production, curtails, increased costs. And this has been devastating. I mean, I just mentioned these 6. When you have this uncertainty in a country, businesses that are going to commit lots of capital look elsewhere. So what has been the impact on capital flows of this legislation? These regulations have profoundly disrupted capital flows into the resource sector in Canada. From 2014 to 2022, business investment in the resource sector declined by over 50%, with Canada capturing a shrinking share of global investment dollars. Analysis from McDonald-Laurier Institute estimate that $670 billion of capital investments were not made as a result of these regulatory changes and uncertainty in the Canadian model. $670 billion. Now, this figure is tied directly, again, to these regulatory barriers such as emission caps, clean fuel rules, which impose ongoing costs, making returns unpredictable, etc., less competitive. And the future is bleak in Canada without policy reversals. Projections suggest continued outflows from Canada. In fact, we saw our fearless Prime Minister was down in Washington yesterday admitting that another $1 trillion is going to leave the country. But Canada could lose, just in terms of new money coming into the country, at least 500 to 800 billion over the next 10 years. It's not going to come in to develop our resources if we keep these policies in place. Now you start adding those numbers up. 6, 7, 800 added to another 600, you got 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, 1.5 trillion dollars. That is a lot of money. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of economic growth that we are not going to experience. So what is the impact on GDP over the last 10 years as a result of missing that 670 billion? Well, if you look at the economic multiplier, typically it's about 2.32. So every dollar that goes into resources is going to produce about $2.32 in economic growth. That means that we have foregone $1.5 trillion of GDP as a result of scaring that capital away and chasing it out of our country. That's really shocking. So when we look at our numbers over the last 10 years and we see the government talking about economic growth of GDP of about 1.8% per year, I mean, that is a joke. Our 1.8% needs to be adjusted, first of all, on a per capita basis, so the number of people. And the number of people has been growing much faster than 1.8%. And it also assumes that you believe the inflation numbers. And I would argue that the inflation numbers are substantially higher than the government's inflation numbers, which when you adjust it, I'm telling you right now, we've seen negative GDP growth for the last 10 years in this country on a per capita basis. And that's what people are feeling, the wealth compression. That we are destroying wealth in this country at an unprecedented level, given what's happening, what the potential that we could have in our country. Now, the impact into the future of this, because if you forego $670 billion in capital, remember that's capital that could be working for you for not just 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. It continues to compound, right? And so we're seeing GDP shortfall of at least $60 to $70 billion a year just by missing that capital. We're also seeing things like foregone royalties on this property. So, people estimate that the government could be receiving another $20 to $30 billion a year in royalties that we're not getting because we didn't make these investments. And I don't have to tell you how much our government needs more revenue, needs to control the spending, of course. But it would be great to have also increasing the pie and having more revenue, and we're foregoing that. So this is very, very serious. If we continue to stifle resource development over the next 10, 15 years, it could easily add up to a foregoing of $3 trillion of GDP, easily. Like, I'm being conservative. And when you think of economy, we're only about $3 trillion. I mean, it's like giving up a whole year of economic growth in this economy. And so this is really substantial. Now, what's the impact on the job market? Well, the job market. So if you look at the job market, you pull out $670 billion of foregone investments. That translates into, just say, $67 billion a year. That's potentially, if you look at 10 jobs per $1 million, again, there's certain ratios you can use. That's 670,000 jobs, that we could have had in this country. Basically in the resource sector, and of course in all of the spin-off benefits of the resource sector, because once you're building something, you need services, you need people, food stores, you need all of the infrastructure around the resource development and all the jobs that go with it. And so we've seen, in Alberta, they got hammered in 2014 to 2016, lost all sorts of jobs in the resource sector, as some of you will know because you represent areas out there and you live in Alberta. And we've seen just this pummeling of the resource sector and the job opportunities. I'll come back to that at the end. And in going into the future, I mean, we're really talking about a real employment problem in this country. We've got high unemployment now. We've got 7-8%. Our youth unemployment in Ontario is like 16%. People can't find jobs, and there's other issues like too rapid immigration and a whole host of other issues. But part of it is we're not creating the jobs because we're not getting the money into the businesses and into the industries, and industries that really pay well and spin off a lot of other jobs. And so we're seeing that. I won't bore you with all the numbers, but there's a lot of numbers. We're foregoing. You're talking probably about 1 million jobs or more over time, over the next, given the last 10 years and another 10 years, that we're not going to have in this country. And those are high-paying jobs. And this we'll get to one of the issues at the end, where what we need to focus on, because we're seeing a brain drain too. I mean, young people who see this, who have opportunities to go elsewhere, you're going elsewhere, just like our capital. And we're going to see this is going to again have a really devastating impact on our Canadian economy long term. So Canada's at a crossroads. The Liberal government legislation from 2015 to 2025 has ravished the resource sector, deterring $670 billion in capital and growing every day, foregoing again $1.55 trillion in GDP, which is only growing and growing and growing and growing. What we're foregoing. So what went wrong? What went wrong? And so I'm going to give you, again, I think, step back just philosophically, theologically, spiritually, to look at what's really wrong with this country. And this isn't, of course, comprehensive, but I'm going to give you a go over, I think, what really is necessary for this country from top to bottom, bottom up. Canada's lost its way by abandoning the very principles that once made it strong. And that's its deeply rooted Christian foundation, grounded in the sovereign decrees of God, as revealed in the Scripture. The West itself, and this isn't just Canada, but the West itself, Western Europe is dying, literally. We've had a bit of a renaissance in the States because of policy changes there, but they have their own issues. The West was built upon biblical truths found in Genesis 1-3. What are some of those biblical truths? Human dignity as image bearers of God, liberty under his lordship, work as a divine calling to exercise dominion, stewardship of creation as a covenantal responsibility, moral accountability before a holy God, private property as a reflection of his provision, and free markets as their outworking of individual responsibility, and strong, faithful families as the cornerstone of society ordained by the Creator. These principles are not merely social ideals. They're not arbitrary constructs, which is what you hear at our typical university. They are God-given mandates built into the fabric of creation itself. They reflect God's providential order. When followed, they foster innovation, responsible resource development, and limited and just governance that honors divine authority rather than usurping it. They affirm that the earth was created with abundant resources and designed for human cultivation and productivity, all under the sovereignty of the triune God. Since the fall, man's fall into sin, which introduced sin's curse and human depravity, wealth creation requires effort and diligence in the face of scarcity. Yet competition, personal responsibility, and free enterprise rooted in the Christian work ethic have consistently proven to be the most effective means of wealth creation for the benefit of all citizens, redeeming labor as a means of glorifying God. Over the last 50 years, the robust Christian worldview has been steadily replaced by a secular worldview, one that often treats the material world as divine, Mother Earth, elevates subjective identity above biological and divine reality, which we see in a lot of the upside-down sexuality we have in our culture, echoing the idolatry warned against by the Apostle Paul in Romans 1. This shift has given rise to radical environmentalism, which idolizes creation rather than honoring and worshiping the Creator and not the creation, violating the first commandment of the Decalogue and leading souls astray from true worship. Under the banner of climate ideology, industries like mining and energy have been unjustly vilified, even as we face massive technological revolution that requires trillions of dollars of capital to be invested in the mining sector, an amazing opportunity for stewardship that secularism and globalism is squandering in our country. The tension in Canada is palpable. revealing the conflict between God's abundant design and humanity's rebellious distortions. In Canada and much of the West, we are surrounded by an anti-materialistic worldview that is fueling a degrowth agenda. Deindustrialization is really what we're seeing. It stands in direct opposition to the biblical commands to fill the earth and subdue it. We see this in the push, you'll hear this push from our friends over in Davos. You'll own nothing and be happy. There was some liberal minister recently said, why do people have to own homes? And you're thinking, are you serious? And Pierre Poilievre pushed back very strongly against that. We own homes because that's a divine right. God has given us the responsibility to own private property. Private property gives us a stake in the economy. Private property allows us to use that as collateral to be able to develop businesses. Of course we need to own private property and homes. And any government who wants to take private property away is an illegitimate government. And it's a government that's against its people. And we see that, unfortunately, increasingly in Canada among some of our politicians. We see, again, in 15-minute cities, this idea that you're not going to go anywhere. You're just going to park yourself in some city in 15 minutes. EV mandates, the elevation of vegan diets, and even the most absurd, I have to always sort of chuckle when I say this attack on cows because they have flatulence. I mean, can you imagine?
So insane.
I mean, this is absolutely ludicrous. This is an ideology, people. You have to understand what's behind all of this. This is really a religion, and it's a false religion. State-enforced carbon rationing, carbon taxes, tracking carbon footprints, none of these things have anything to do with stewarding the environment. Rather, they have everything to do with top-down control, fostering and increasing authoritarianism and subjugation to the state. We all know that. Thankfully, President Trump actually got up in the UN and mentioned that and said it. The elephant in the room, that this is a scam. This is an absolute scam. And it's a power play of the globalists. And it's clearly obvious. I think most people in this room know that. Instead of attacking private property, we must champion it as a God-ordained institution that protects against tyranny and enables faithful stewardship. No economic system rivals the free market in generating wealth and managing resources efficiently as it aligns with biblical principles of diligence and reward. God created a world full of resources, entrusted it to humanity under his covenant, and called us to develop and steward it wisely, multiplying talents for his glory. In the age dominated by climate alarmism and zero-sum economics, we must return to the truth that God's creation is abundant and designed for human flourishing, not scarcity imposed by false and fallen ideologies. Cultures that embrace artificial scarcity, deify the nature, which is a lot of religions around the world. If you go places and you see people living in poverty, they've usually deified the nature. They adopt a stagnant view of economics, will always favor what? Redistribution over production. Perverting justice and ignoring the sinfulness of mankind that makes such a system ripe for abuse. They will stifle innovation, discourage investment, and ultimately cause economic decline as they rebel against God's providential abundance. Canada is Exhibit A. Redistribution doesn't just rearrange wealth, it destroys it. When people know that their work will be seized, they produce less. They invest less. They save less. And they innovate less. Redistribution doesn't create a bigger pie. It shrinks it, undermining the biblical ethic of work and reward. Canada has become a redistributory economy, and we're shrinking. And there's no two ways about it. We have to become a production economy. And then you can help people who are legitimately in need. But if you don't produce anything, you got nothing to redistribute. And that's what's really happening in our own country. None of this can change without dramatically reducing the size of government, restoring it to its God-ordained limits of upholding justice rather than playing provider. It is God's ordained, over the past 60 years, I should say, the state's share of the economy in Western nations has ballooned from around 20% in the 60s up to about 45%. In France, it's over 60%, and we know what's happening in France. They're ready to collapse. Such expansion is unsustainable and idolatrous. It's idolatrous because it elevates the state above God. The state is not God. It's inefficient, unaccountable, and wasteful with its resources, largely, if it becomes too large. How can nearly half of the resources be controlled by government without crippling the private sector under taxes and regulations and without violating the commandment against theft? And what we have now is we have a tax system which I would argue is so rapacious that really is borderline on theft. For Canada to thrive again, we must return to our Christian foundation, exalting Christ as King over all spheres, and slay the leviathan of big government. Only then can we restore economic freedom and rebuild prosperity. Honor the created order that made Canada a powerful and prosperous country, and be worthy of the immense physical blessings that God has bestowed on this country in His sovereign grace. Practically speaking, Canada must act decisively to reclaim its position as a global resource power. So first, what do we need to do? I'm going to give you 4 things quickly. First, we need to slash bureaucratic red tape and streamline permitting processes, reversing the shameful slide from 3 to 5 years to a decade or more, which inflates capital costs, strangles project viability. The result, capital is leaving the country and leaving it quickly. Governments must get out of the way. C5, which grants the PM and the Cabinet discretionary power to decide which projects undergo full regulatory assessments and which get fast-tracked based upon their perceived contributions to national interest, is outrageous. It's absolutely outrageous. It's not the government that should be picking and choosing projects. That's up to the private sector. And if you didn't have the regulations, the money would come in. You wouldn't need government money going in, and then government money costing 3 and 4 times as much as it should, right? We've seen that. We saw that with Christy Friedland and her responsibilities. Rather than providing predictable rules for entrepreneurs and businesses, Ottawa has created an opaque process where companies must lobby Cabinet to prove their projects meet subjective criteria to circumvent the laws and regulations that apply to everybody else. That's what you call money laundering. And we've seen that in Ottawa to a large extent, haven't we? We've seen the projects that go to certain people. And this is a great way to channel, even if you, first of all, they're slow walking everything, but even when they do something, it's going to go to their friends. This is not fair, it's not just, and it's not going to result in a boom of capital and investments in our country. Simple as that. Second, we cannot afford to hemorrhage our brightest minds in the resource sector. Retaining and attracting world-class talent is essential to averting a catastrophic long-term brain drain. And I won't say any more than that, but Jesse and I have talked to a number of resource companies, and this is the big concern they have. They can't get people to even in the resource sector who want to work in that sector. And if they are in that sector, they're leaving. They're going to go to the States. Of course they're going to go down there. Why wouldn't they? Where they're going to make more money, be taxed less, and have greater opportunities. Third, we must halt the hollowing out of our homegrown resource powerhouses, our great companies. We've seen less and less companies here in Canada, dominant players. I had a list that I printed out, but I don't have it here with me now, but how many great companies that we've lost to the States or outside the country. We have the tech angle thing going on now. But this mass exodus of great companies, because they're not respected. There's no pride in our country for mining and resource sector. It's been stomped upon, so why aren't they leaving? Of course they're going to leave. And we can't afford that, though. We're losing some of our best businesses. Lastly, we must save Canada from the destructive forces of socialism and globalism. This can only begin with each individual humbly turning their hearts back to God. I'd argue very strongly in repentance to Jesus Christ. We need a faith return. We need a spiritual revival in this country. We are a desolate, desperate, parched land in this country, spiritually speaking. The nation cannot be healed unless people are first healed spiritually, forsaking the false god of statism and global tyranny. These are false gods. Only by returning to the lordship of Christ can we restore foundational Christian values that build strong and sovereign Canada, casting off the chains, of collective idolatry and reclaiming our God-given identity. May he have dominion from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the earth, should be our cry of Psalm 72:8, which used to be our motto, right? He'll have dominion from sea to sea. Our founders picked that for a reason. Mm-hmm. And we don't go back to that pretty soon. We're going to see a complete devastation of this economy. Canadian politicians and academics have vilified our vital resource and mining sector, eroding the profound national pride we once cherished in these global enterprises that forged our great nation's prosperity. It's time to reclaim that legacy and restore Canada's rightful place on the world stage. The time for bold reform is now. Our future prosperity demands it. I am encouraged, with some of the changes that have taken place in Ottawa, not with the government in power, but with many of you here, and I think the aggressiveness in a positive sense that we're seeing out of the Conservative Party and pushing back against these destructive forces and saying we're going to develop our land, we're going to do it responsibly, we're going to do it wisely, and we can become a powerful country again. And so I encourage you that we have the resources. God has providentially given us a rich, rich country, but we need to have the will to develop it. And that will ultimately come from a strong spiritual faith renewal, which will push up and push out these false gods that have dominated our thinking in this country and really put us in a terrible position financially. So with that, that's what I think. Canada's role in the coming resource boom, we can have a big one, but it's all up to us. We need to push and make sure that that is a big, big role in the coming economy in the next number of decades. So with that, I'll end.
The question is Europe, specifically Western Europe. There seems to be more hope with Eastern Europe. I'm hopeful that Christian values will come back to Europe. It seems that young people are coming back to the church and to their values. What are your observations on Europe?
What I would say is, first of all, take it in two sections. Number one, the current course of Western Europe is total suicide. It's a suicide pact, right? And we're just a little bit further behind what they're doing. I was in Hungary, actually, with Kathy Wagenthal back in 2017. I remember being in the second in command. This was the Prime Minister. It was just under Viktor Orban in his office. And he explained, he actually said he went back in history, he gave us the Ottoman Empire and so forth, took us back a number of hundred years, and he said, I give Germany 8 or 9 years before there's total chaos in that country. That was back in 2017. And they could see that coming, there's, first of all, there isn't a strong faith base. They've rejected their roots, and then you bring in mass immigration, and people don't share the same culture, same different values. In Munich, my wife was in German background, she told me that they canceled the Oktoberfest in Munich. Because this is a country that's been taken over. And you think that the Germans would capitulate that. So the answer to your question is, they are a serious free fall. France is in serious free fall. The UK is just on the brink. Financially, spiritually, morally, it's free speech. Again, they're passing. I know we got legislation to try and pass, which is probably too much different. So I think the question then becomes, what can God do there? Will there be a revival? Will the youth that we're seeing, I think, become a bit more conservative? Pierre Poilievre will get more conservative votes. Donald Trump got a lot more conservative votes. Thanks Charlie Kirk, Turning Point, had a big impact in the U.S. and stuff. Some of the young people are seeing the bankruptcy of what they're being taught. The schools, they don't want to break up with the family. They're seeing all of these problems and saying there's got to be more. So I think that is our hope, the young people, that there will be a massive spiritual revival, that the baby boomers, my generation, have been big failures, massive failures. And we've handed our kids a real mess and our grandkids a mess. So that is our hope. So right now, without that, it's a very ugly picture for Europe. You think of the United States in the EU, with the same economic size 25 years ago. Now the States is 50% larger than the EU. And I would argue if the policies of Trump can stay in place the next 12 years, a couple more Republicans who stay on the same track, they'll be 50% bigger again. Because that's where all the money's going to go, and the capital is going to go. And they'll completely eat our lunch, as we know also, which is what we're seeing. And we're not playing our card. We're not playing our competitive position. We've taken away our competitive position and think we're going to compete on manufacturing. Are you kidding me? So this is a big problem. But I think, again, it gets back to we need a spiritual awakening. We need the young people to say enough's enough. We need to go back, again, to truth and to values. And you see some of that, and we need to pray and do everything we can that actually takes hold and it becomes a reality. Because without that, But the good thing is, I'm a Christian. I look at history as when it gets darkest. That's when God often does wonderful things, right? After darkness, light. And people, we go up and down because people get complacent. They get, they don't, they think about themselves. That leads to a huge fall, which we're seeing, and then they start to panic and they go, where do we turn now? And then they turn back to where they should in the first place, right? So I'm hoping that's the case. And in Canada also, we're seeing some of that amongst some young people, but again, we have to really fight back. Our educational institutions are abysmal. It's terrible what's happening there. So we need to, there's lots of work to be done.
We need to be cautious about saying there's no support for the energy industry. There are Canadians who champion this industry. We are already going through brownouts every winter, turning off unnecessary lights in order to keep the heat on. As we move forward with electrification, this will only get worse. We do not have the infrastructure in place to support our current needs, let alone our future needs.
You're exactly right. We're at the electrical grids are at their limit now in many places. Look at California too, and they want everyone to plug into the system that can't produce it. So, and your point about the oil industry, no, there's lots of people that support it. Unfortunately, at the federal level, the last few years, that's where it's been an issue.
90% plus of the value of the S&P 500 is in intangible assets. We see many companies being picked off by the US. Losing this intellectual property and the value generated is an existential long-term threat for the country. Can you address that from your worldview of resource development and management?
Well, that's another issue that is a major issue. Yeah, we're losing in the tech industry, and as you point out, the majority of the market cap is in the tech industry. Part of that is because the resource sector is undervalued on a cash flow basis. I would suggest that the oil and gas sector in Canada is incredibly cheap in terms of its valuation, and probably one of the best places to invest over the next couple of years. Even with these problems, if we could straighten it out, we'd have a lot more money. But no, I mean, back in 2000, 1999 up until 2000, the tech bubble, as you know, a lot of the companies in Ottawa, the Ottawa region was quite powerful in technology, and then you had Waterloo and so on. Those companies, we developed a number of companies, but I think the tax policies were much more favorable. We had centers of excellence and so forth that rewarded that, and so it stayed here for a while. A lot of that's just eroded, Doug, as you know. And the incentives to stay here are just less and less. And so it's going to be a real battle to win that back. It's going to be very, very difficult. And so, I mean, capital gains taxes, allowing venture businesses to grow without as many rules and regulations, all of those things would have to be looked at in policy changes and how we could actually attract and keep the best minds in the country. I mean, we've got great schools. We have a couple of great schools, even in Montreal, some very high-tech schools. You've got, of course, Waterloo, but you're right. I mean, as soon as there's anything that looks like it's going to be high value, it's gone. It's snapped up, and this is going to be a huge problem for Canada.
Would you like to comment on the fact that we are very wealthy, we are being ignored and abused, but at some point in time, someone, somewhere is going to be making a lot of money on Canada? Is it going to be Canadians? The scary thing is there's clearly intentionality on a global level in what's currently happening.
Well, the way things are going, probably, potentially not, right? Canada is incredibly wealthy, and there's all sorts of pressures. Those assets eventually, I think, will be utilized by somebody. I find it hard to believe, and again, I'm not trying to be rude or anything, but some of these policies that I went through, these are some of the most inane and stupid and self-destructive policies that you could possibly come up with. And again, that's the way I view it. It is a suicide pact, really, and you're undermining your own country. So I think that there is more of a design there. It has to be. I just don't think these people are, they're smarter than that. So that's a big concern, and that's why we have to win back the government to people who love Canada and put Canada first. There's nothing wrong with putting Canada first, and Trump putting the U.S. first. If you're Britain, you put Britain first. By having strong nation states that compete, that's the best thing to keep everybody in checks and balances. This is an amazing country. We have an incredible history, incredible people, incredible resources, and I think we've got to push back against that and have pride in our country and hope in our country because it is a great country. And I think that's, again, part of the things that you can do in your position in government to push back on that and continue to champion how great this country is and how open we've been and how accepting we've been and how generous we've been around the world. But we have to look after our own too, right? And we don't want pressure. Again, I mean, you folks know better because some of you live in Alberta, live in Saskatchewan. I mean, the last thing we want to see is a country breaks up. But you can push things to some pretty big limits, right? I mean, people can only take so much, and hopefully that does not happen. But I mean, eventually, if you have a real wealthy region like Saskatchewan or Alberta, and you completely continue to put restrictions on that indefinitely, that's going to cause a boiling point, and that would be dangerous.